The Quiet Man in the Corner, a story about being invisible, being underestimated, and what happens when you're done with both. They say the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody is watching. My name is Owen Park. For 9 years, I let them watch my wife instead. Part 1, The Invisible Husband. My wife Claire keeps a color-coded calendar that extends 18 months into the future. I know this because I once asked her idly what she was doing on a Thursday afternoon 14 months from then. And she told me without hesitation, board prep for the Wentworth merger, and then asked me why I wanted to know. And when I said, just curious, she looked at me the way people look at the person who ordered the wrong thing at the restaurant and went back to her phone. My name is Owen Park. I am 41 years old. I live in the DuPont Circle neighborhood of Washington, D.C., in a townhouse that Claire selected, decorated, and refers to as hers. In casual conversation with enough frequency that I have noticed it but chosen not to comment. I work as a research analyst. According to Claire's friends, I am dependably pleasant, which in the social vocabulary of their particular circle translates to impressive with his quiet little job. And according to Claire's mother, a woman named Helen, who has the warmth of a congressional subpoena, I am not exactly what she envisioned for her daughter, but one learns to adapt. Claire is a partner at Caldwell Sheridan, and more the kind of firm whose name appears in national business publications and whose partners are interviewed on financial programs by hosts who address them by first name. She handles M&A mergers and acquisitions with the specific, contained intensity of someone who has organized her entire character around winning, which is effective in a boardroom and requires some navigation at home. She is brilliant. I have always known she is brilliant. This is not the part I underestimated. The part I underestimated was Marcus Reed. Marcus is the managing partner at the firm, 45, the kind of tall that reads as presence rather than height, with the specific grooming of a man who understands that appearance is power in his industry and has chosen to treat it that way. He drives what looks like a modest car, a BMW sedan. Not the ostentatious model and wear suits that are expensive, in the way that expensive suits look when the person wearing them wants you to know they're expensive without appearing to want you to know. I have met Marcus at approximately 12 firm events over the past 2 years. He shook my hand each time with the firm confidence of a man shaking hands with someone whose name he does not need to retain. He never retained my name. I noted this without emotion. What I was less neutral about was the pattern I began noticing in October, the pattern that started small and specific and grew over 6 weeks into something I could no longer reasonably attribute to professional demands. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the coffee. Part 2, Thomas. My downstairs neighbor is a man named Thomas Beaumont, retired district court judge, 71 years old, with the specific sardonic quality that develops in people who have spent 40 years listening to other people explain why their behavior was reasonable and have formed a comprehensive view of human nature as a result. Thomas makes excellent coffee on a Chemex that he treats with the reverence of a precision instrument. He makes it every morning on his back terrace, which has a direct sightline to the alley behind our building and the adjacent parking structure. And he drinks it while reading the Post and occasionally reporting what he observes with the specific unstaged candor of a person who has decided that honesty is the only communication mode worth maintaining at 71. He called me down on a Tuesday in late October. I came down in my work-from-home clothes, which is to say, the clothes I wear when the only person who will see me is my laptop camera, which means they are comfortable but not impressive, and Thomas handed me a cup without preamble and said, "I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hear it before I tell you, which is that I am not certain, I am only observant." I told him I understood. "Marcus Reed's car has been in your parking space 3 times this month," he said. "The first 2 times were after you'd left for the office. The last time was last Thursday when you were in Baltimore for your conference. It left at 2 in the morning. I drank my coffee. Below us the alley was quiet, a November morning, the specific gray of DC fall. Do you know what he looks like?" I asked. "I know what his car looks like," Thomas said. "And I know what a man who is trying not to be seen looks like. He parks 1 space over from yours, never in yours, so he can claim it was coincidence if someone asks. He always comes after 6. I thanked Thomas. He handed me a second cup and we sat for a while looking at the alley and talking about nothing in particular, which is the thing about Thomas. He delivers information and then gives you space for it, which is more than most people manage. I walked back upstairs and sat at my desk and opened my laptop and started doing what I do. I am a research analyst. This is true. What I research, and for whom, is somewhat more specific than the title suggests. Part 3, what I actually do. Let me tell you what my business actually is, because the story does not make complete sense without it, and I have been carrying the omission long enough that it feels like its own weight. Park Research Partners is the name of the firm on my business cards. The cards are plain black text on white stock, the kind that communicates nothing about budget and everything about the preference to communicate nothing. The website is minimal. The office address is a service address in Northern Virginia that I use for mail forwarding. What Park Research Partners actually does is provide competitive intelligence and strategic analysis services to a roster of clients that includes 4 U.S. senators, 11 Fortune 100 companies, 3 foreign embassies operating through appropriate legal channels, and a private equity consortium that manages approximately $40 billion in assets. The revenue last fiscal year was $63 million. I employ 22 people, all remote, none of whom have met each other in person. The work we do is legal, meticulous, and consequential in ways that I do not discuss at dinner parties. I have been building this business for 13 years, 4 years before I met Claire, and 9 years of our marriage. The tax returns that Claire has filed jointly for the past 9 years show an income from Owen Park consistent with a comfortable but unremarkable research analyst. This is accurate in the same way that a photograph of a building's exterior is accurate about the building. Claire has never asked to look at my business in detail. She has over 9 years shown exactly the level of interest in my work that one shows in something one considers a pleasant hobby maintained by a person whose primary value is not professional. This suited me for reasons that were professional and I understand now also damaged us in ways I did not fully acknowledge. When Thomas told me about Marcus Reed's car, I sat at my desk and ran a standard assessment of the situation with the tools available to me, which are considerable. Within 4 days, I had a complete picture. Part 4, the complete picture. Marcus Reed and Claire had been having an affair for approximately 7 months. The documentation was straightforward to assemble once I knew where to look. Hotel receipts, credit card patterns, location data, the specific rhythm of 2 people managing a sustained deception within a professional environment where they had legitimate reason to be in contact. The affair had begun in late March, following a firm retreat in Charlottesville that Claire had attended and described to me as productive and somewhat dull. It was neither productive nor dull in the way she had implied. I also found in the course of my research something that was not the affair and was considerably more significant. Marcus Reed was skimming from client accounts. The mechanism was elegant in the way that financial fraud is sometimes elegant, a series of transaction structures that individually pass compliance review and collectively move money in a direction it was not supposed to go. The amount assembled from 18 months of activity was approximately $4.7 million. The destination was a holding entity in the Cayman Islands that Marcus had established through a law firm in London, and the beneficial owner of that entity was Marcus Reed, operating under a company name that bore no visible connection to him. Claire was not aware of this. Of this I was certain, because my research included a thorough review of Claire's professional activity and financial records, and the fraud was structured specifically to exclude her from knowledge of it. She was, in the specific legal terminology, a potential witness rather than a participant. I sat with this for 3 days, not because I needed the time to decide what to do. The decision when I examined it was not complicated, but because the 3 days were necessary to do the thing correctly, and doing it correctly was the only version worth doing. On the 4th day, I called a meeting. Part 5, the 9 years. I want to stop here and tell you about the 9 years, because I think the story is incomplete without them, and I do not want to tell the abbreviated version. Claire and I met at a policy conference in Chicago when I was 32 and she was 30. She had given a panel presentation on regulatory frameworks and M&A that was the clearest and most densely argued thing I had heard in 2 days of dense argumentation. And afterward, I had approached her with a specific question about a point in her presentation that was, I thought at the time, my best opening, and she had answered it with the particular precision of someone who had been waiting to be asked exactly that question by someone who had actually listened. We talked for 3 hours in the hotel lobby. We exchanged numbers. We were in separate cities for 6 months of long-distance correspondence that I considered the most interesting conversation I had had with another person, and that she described to a friend in an email I was not supposed to see, but did as promising. I loved her for her mind first, the specific quality of intelligence she had, systematic, adversarial, in the useful sense, completely intolerant of imprecision. I loved that she would argue with me about anything, and that her arguments were always well constructed even when they were wrong, and that she would acknowledge being wrong with the specific grace of a person who values accuracy more than winning. The second year of the marriage, she made partner. This was not a surprise. She had been working toward it since law school with the specific organized intention that characterized everything she did. What was a surprise, or perhaps not a surprise, but something I had not fully anticipated, was how completely the partnership absorbed her. The version of Claire who had the time and energy for the conversations we used to have became gradually the version who came home at 10 and ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter and answered emails while I described my day and said in the specific frequency that indicates hearing without listening. I adapted. I have always been good at adapting. I reduced my expectations of what the marriage would offer and increased my investment in the work, which was willing to receive everything I gave it, and I told myself this was what long relationships look like after the early intensity, and that it was fine. It was fine in the way that barely adequate is fine, when you've stopped expecting anything better. I missed her. Not the way you miss someone who has left, the way you miss someone who is in the same room but elsewhere. This is a more complicated kind of missing because it doesn't have a clear address, and because the person can look at you and say, I'm right here, and be correct in every literal sense and still completely wrong about what you're describing. I missed her for approximately 4 years before Marcus Reed made my options concrete. Part 6, The Gala. Caldwell, Sheridan, and Moore hosted their annual client appreciation gala at the Hay Adams Hotel on a Friday evening in early December. I had attended this event 7 times. Each time I wore the same dark suit, stood near the same corner of the ballroom with a glass of whatever the open bar was pouring, and spent 2 hours being pleasantly invisible while Claire worked the room with the specific focused energy of someone performing at the highest level of their chosen arena. I was proud of her in these moments. I am still proud of her. The things she does, the way she enters a room and reads it and moves through it is genuinely impressive, and I am not pretending otherwise. This year I came prepared, not in the obvious way. I came in the same dark suit with the same posture of mild irrelevance, and I took the same position near the corner of the ballroom, and I accepted the same glass of something dry and red from the same type of passing server. Everything looked identical to the previous 7 times. The differences were invisible. The first difference was the 3 people stationed at specific positions around the room. A woman near the main entrance, a man near the firm's executive table, and Thomas's nephew Marcus. Not Marcus Reed, a different Marcus, which Claire would later find irritating in its coincidental humor, near the exit corridor. Each of them was doing something unremarkable. One appeared to be a guest. One appeared to be a server. One appeared to be checking his phone, and each of them had a specific role in what was about to happen. The second difference was in my jacket pocket, a tablet loaded with documents that represented 8 months of research, and an earpiece through which I could hear what was being said at the executive table across the room. The third difference was the presence at that executive table of Representative Diane Walsh, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee's Oversight Subcommittee, and her chief of staff. They had been invited by the firm because Representative Walsh was a significant client. She would be staying for what happened next for reasons of her own. The fourth difference was that I had called the firm's senior managing partner, Harold Sheridan. Harold Sheridan of Caldwell. Sheridan and Moore, the H in the firm's name, 81 years old, retired but present at the gala, as he was every year that morning, and asked for 15 minutes of his time. He had granted them. And in those 15 minutes, I had told him enough of what I knew to ensure that when the evening proceeded in the direction I intended, Harold Sheridan would not be surprised. At 9:15, Claire found me near my corner. "You look bored," she said. "I'm comfortable," I said. She handed me a fresh glass of wine. "Marcus is going to make a toast in about 20 minutes. You should come to the executive table." "Of course," I said. I followed her across the room. Part 7, The Dinner Table Conversation. At the executive table, the assembled partners and significant clients occupied 12 chairs. I was given the chair at the far end, the courtesy chair, the spouse's chair, the chair that exists so that the relevant people don't have to acknowledge that someone is being excluded. Marcus Reed was at the opposite end. He had the easy authority of a man who has been the most important person at tables for long enough that he has stopped checking. He glanced at me when I sat down, registered me as Claire's husband, and returned to his conversation with the person to his left. Claire sat between me and a senior partner named Elaine, who I liked, and who was the only person at the table who asked me genuine questions about my work on a regular basis. "How is the research business?" Elaine asked. "Productive," I said. "Owen is very modest about his work," Claire said, with the specific inflection that communicates modesty as a diminutive. "He keeps things very quiet." "I prefer it that way," I said. Across the table, Representative Walsh was listening to something Harold Sheridan was telling her. I watched his expression, the slow shift from conversational to attentive. That happens when someone receives information they did not expect to receive. He glanced at me once briefly, and I gave him the small nod we had established that morning. At 9:42, Marcus Reed stood up to make his toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with the specific projected confidence of a man who practices speaking to rooms. "Tonight represents another year of excellence at this firm, and I want to take a moment to recognize the partnerships that have made that excellence possible." Marcus. Harold Sheridan's voice cut through with the specific authority of someone who has not used it in years, and whose using of it therefore carries the weight of accumulated disuse. "I wonder if we might do something slightly different tonight?" The room tilted. Marcus very slightly lost the thread of his prepared remarks. "Harold," he said carefully, "of course. What did you have in mind?" Harold stood. He was 81 and moved with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that age had reduced his speed and chose to treat the reduction as authority rather than limitation. "I'd like to introduce someone," Harold said, "a guest who has some information relevant to the firm's interests. Owen Park." He looked at me. "Would you mind?" I stood up. I stood. Part 8, The Room. The room did not know what to do with me. I was the quiet man. From the corner, the invisible husband, the one whose name nobody retained, standing at the head of a table at the Hay Adams in front of the assembled partners of a major law firm and a ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee's subcommittee. I was visually not what the moment seemed to require. I had counted on this. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed the tablet on the table. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Owen Park. Most of you know me as Claire's husband. I'm also the managing director of Park Research Partners, which provides competitive intelligence services to a number of clients some of you may recognize." I turned the tablet screen outward and tapped it once. A list appeared, company names and initials, sufficient for recognition without being a complete disclosure. "I'm here tonight because in the course of research conducted on behalf of several of those clients, I encountered information that is directly relevant to this firm." Marcus Reed had gone very still. It was the stillness of a person who has assessed a situation and identified that movement will make things worse. "Over the past 14 months, I said, keeping my voice at the register I use for client presentations, level specific, no performance. Approximately $4.7 million has been redirected from client accounts through a transaction structure designed to avoid triggering standard compliance review." I tapped the tablet again. "The mechanism involves a series of instruments. I have the full documentation here, and the beneficial destination is an entity established in the Cayman Islands in the name of Meriden Capital Advisors, LLC. Meriden Capital Advisors was incorporated 16 months ago through a London firm. The beneficial owner is Marcus Reed." The silence in the room had the specific quality of air before lightning. Claire had gone white. Not the white of a person who knew and has now discovered the white of a person receiving information they genuinely did not know and are processing in real time. I had been certain of this from my research. I remained certain now watching her face. Marcus moved to speak. Harold Sheridan, with the specific authority I had described, simply raised one hand. "Let him finish," Harold said. I finished. 4 minutes covering the mechanism, the documentation, the destination, and the amount. When I concluded, I tapped the tablet a final time and sent the complete file package to 3 email addresses simultaneously: Harold Sheridan's representative, Walsh's chief of staffs, and the compliance division of the DC Bar Association. I've taken the liberty of sharing the documentation with the appropriate parties, I said. The representative's office may find it relevant to the Oversight Subcommittee's existing inquiry into financial practices at large private law firms. I looked at Representative Walsh, who was already leaning toward her chief of staff. And Harold, I believe you have counsel standing by? Harold nodded. Thank you, Owen. I sat down. The room took approximately 4 seconds to begin responding, and then it responded with the specific, organized chaos of a group of lawyers who have been trained to respond to crises by immediately establishing legal positions. Marcus Reed across the table was looking at me. I had been looked at by many people in the course of my career. I had been looked at by senators during testimony, by CEOs, during negotiations, by opposing counsel, during depositions. Marcus Reed's look was different from all of them. It was the look of a man who has been for 9 years looking at Claire's husband in the corner and has just understood in a single terrible moment what he was not looking at. You, he said. Yes, I said. Claire was still very still beside me. I did not look at her yet. Part 9. Claire. I need to tell you about the conversation that happened afterward because it is the part of the story I have gone back to the most often, and the part I think matters more than the gala. We walked home. Not by choice, there was a car available, but by the mutual unspoken agreement of 2 people who understand that a closed car is not the right space for what needs to be said. The December DC night was cold and clear, the city doing its nighttime thing around us. And we walked the 12 blocks from the Hay Adams to the DuPont Circle townhouse in the specific silence of 2 people who have been married for 9 years and can hear each other thinking. On the corner of P Street, Claire stopped. How long have you known? She asked. About Marcus and the fraud 6 weeks, about the affair a month and a half before that. She looked at me. The specific way she was looking at me, not with guilt, not with anger, not with the specific panic of someone whose situation has been publicly exposed, was the look I recognized from the first evening in Chicago. The systematic intelligence working through information, arriving at the part of the analysis that wasn't about her. You could have told me, she said. About the fraud. You didn't have to make it a gala. Ma'am? If I had told you, I said, you would have had to disclose it to the firm, and the disclosure would have been attributed to you and a fair partner reporting a senior partner. It would have destroyed your career alongside his. The way it happened, you're a witness. The only person who had the full picture independent of the firm was someone entirely external to it, and she understood immediately. This was the thing I had always loved about her, the speed of the understanding. You protected my career, she said. The fraud was going to come out, I said. It was only a matter of who found it and how. I found it, and I chose how. She was quiet for a block. Why? She asked. Not why did I expose the fraud, she had followed that logic. Why the choice? Why the care? After everything. I had thought about this for 6 weeks. I had the answer. Because the fraud was real and separate from us, I said. Whatever you chose about your marriage, you didn't deserve to have your professional life destroyed by his crime. Those are different things. She stopped again on the next corner. I have to tell you something, she said. You don't have to tell me anything tonight. I want to. She looked at the street. It was ending. With Marcus, I had been trying to figure out how to end it for 2 months. I didn't know about the money. I knew something was wrong with him. Something had changed in the past few months, and I was trying to get out before I understood what I was getting out of. I believed her. My research supported this. The pattern of contact between Marcus and Claire had changed. In September, she had been initiating contact, less declining invitations, leaving meetings early. The specific behavior of a person who has recognized a mistake and is in the process of trying to correct it. I know, I said. She looked at me. You knew that too. Yes. Then why the gala? The gala was for the fraud, I said. That required a setting and witnesses independent of the firm's internal structure. It couldn't wait. We walked the last 4 blocks in silence. At the front door of the townhouse, she stopped with her key in the lock. I don't know where we are, she said. Neither do I. I said. I think that's the right place to start. She opened the door. Part 10, what Thomas said. I went down to Thomas's terrace the following morning. It was 6:30 and the December DC air was the specific cold that requires a serious jacket, and Thomas was already there with his Chemex reading the Post. He handed me a cup without preamble. Then he looked at me steadily. How did it go? He said. It went, I said. The Post doesn't have it yet, but they will by this afternoon. I know. We sat for a while. The alley below was empty. No BMW in the adjacent space. She didn't know about the money? Thomas said. It was not a question. No. You were sure before the gala? Yes. He nodded. He turned a page in the Post. What happens now? Depends on whether there's anything worth rebuilding, I said. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've seen a lot of things from this terrace. I've seen that parking space for 2 months. And I've seen your wife leave for work every morning for 9 years. And I've seen her come home late every night. She works hard. Yes, I said. She's also, he said carefully in the way that people are careful when they're saying something important, been coming home later than she used to in the past month. Not because of Marcus Reed. She's been coming home later than Marcus Reed requires. She's been coming home the way people come home when they're not sure what they're coming home to. I looked at the alley. She's been coming home to figure out how to fix something, Thomas said. That's my Reed. I'm only observant. I finished my coffee. Part 11, the business card. At 2 in the afternoon on the day after the gala, my phone rang with a number I recognized as Harold Sheridan's private line. He told me 3 things. The first, Marcus Reed had retained defense counsel by 9 that morning and had made no comment to the firm. The Bar Association's compliance division had acknowledged receipt of the documentation and opened a preliminary inquiry. The second, Representative Walsh's chief of staff had requested a full copy of the documentation for the subcommittee inquiry. Harold's firm counsel had advised cooperation, which Harold had authorized. The third, Harold Sheridan wanted to have a conversation about Park Research Partners and whether its capabilities might be relevant to a due diligence practice he had been considering establishing within the firm. I thanked him and told him I would be in touch. After the call, I sat at my desk and thought about the business card I had given Marcus Reed's associate at the gala when they had come to take my details for the incident documentation. Not the plain white card, the other one. The one with the Park Research Partners logo that listed the firm's capabilities in the specific language that says to anyone who speaks the language what the firm actually does. Marcus Reed would be looking at that card from wherever he was, and he would understand, with the full comprehension of a man who had spent 20 years in the legal profession, what it meant that the quiet and in the corner had been for 9 years, running a firm capable of what had been demonstrated the previous evening. He would also understand which was the part I thought about most, that he had been in the same room with me for 2 years and had never once looked at me with the attention that would have told him any of this. Being invisible is not the same as being small. Most people never understand the difference. Marcus Reed, as of last night, understood it very well. Part 12, the conversation we hadn't had. Claire and I sat at the kitchen table on the 3rd evening after the gala. Not the formal dining table, the small one in the kitchen, where we had always done the ordinary conversations, the logistical ones, the ones about grocery lists and weekend plans and whose turn it was to call the building manager, about the heating unit. The kitchen table was where we talked when we weren't performing. She had been at the firm all day, and what I gathered from the brief text had been a series of difficult meetings. The fraud investigation had moved quickly. The documentation I had provided was comprehensive, and the firm's leadership, having been made aware in advance by Harold, had moved to contain the situation in ways that insulated the innocent partners. Claire's role had been clarified as witness. Her professional position was by all accounts intact. She sat across from me with tea she wasn't drinking. People have been very kind today, she said, in ways that feel like they're managing me. They're probably managing both the situation and you simultaneously, I said. Those aren't always distinguishable from the outside. She looked at her tea. Elaine told me you've been to 7 of those galas, she said, 8 counting last night. She said she didn't realize until last night that she'd never asked you a substantive question about your work. She felt bad about it. She asked more than most, I said. Claire looked up. Why did you let it be that way? I thought about how to answer this honestly. Because I chose to build something that didn't require anyone to know what I was building, I said. The invisibility was professional strategy. I kept it compartmentalized. I paused. I also kept it compartmentalized in my marriage, which was not professional strategy. That was a failure. You should have told me, she said. Yes, I should have asked. Yes, I said. That's also true. We sat with both truths. They existed simultaneously and did not cancel each other out. I don't know who you are, she said. Not accusation, genuine statement. I thought I knew who you were. I've been married to you for 9 years, and last night I found out that what I knew was a significant misrepresentation by omission. That's accurate, I said. Why? The question again, the same question she had asked on P Street and I had answered, and now she was asking the deeper version. Because I believed, I said slowly, that if you knew the full scope of what I was building, it would change the dynamic of the marriage. And I had a version of the marriage that I valued even as it was diminishing, and I was afraid that the change would cost me that version. She was quiet. And I was wrong, I said. The version of the marriage I was protecting was already mostly gone. What I should have done was introduce the full version of myself to the person I married and trusted her to decide what she thought of both of us together. She looked at me for a long time. 63 million, she said. Last fiscal year. Owen, I know. She put her face in her hands, not crying, the specific gesture of a person who needs a moment to recalibrate. Then she put her hands down. I had an affair with my managing partner, she said, for 7 months, and I was trying to end it. And then my husband, who I believe was a research analyst, turned out to be running a $63 million intelligence firm and dismantled the affair partner at a law firm gala in front of the House Judiciary Committee. Yes, I said. She looked at me. Something moved across her face that I had not seen in approximately 4 years. The expression from the hotel lobby in Chicago. The specific attention of someone who is working with you, rather than the model of you. You're the most interesting person I've never met, she said. I looked at my wife. I've been here, I said. I know, she said. I know that now. Part 13, what Marcus Reed got. Marcus Reed was disbarred in March. The timeline was faster than these proceedings typically move, which reflected the quality of the documentation I had provided and the particular motivation of the subcommittee to demonstrate that its oversight function had teeth. The fraud case was referred to the DOJ. That proceeding would take longer. He had already vacated his partnership position within 10 days of the gala. I did not follow his story closely after the disbarment. My research on him had served its purpose, and I had no professional or personal interest in the aftermath. What I understood about the aftermath I knew from Thomas, who continued to observe the alley from his terrace with the specific, focused attention of a person who understands that observation is itself a contribution. His car is gone. Thomas reported on a Tuesday in February. 3 weeks. He's moved, I said. Looks like it. Thomas handed me a coffee. You know what I think is interesting? Tell me. He spent 2 years looking at that parking space as a convenience. Never occurred to him to look up. Thomas gestured toward our terrace 1 floor above. Never occurred to him that someone was watching from above. I drank my coffee. That's the thing about being invisible, Thomas said. People forget to look, and what they don't look at, they don't understand. And what they don't understand, they underestimate. Yes, I said. He underestimated you for 2 years. He underestimated me for 1 evening, I said. The previous 2 years he didn't bother. Thomas smiled. It was the smile of a retired judge who has heard many things and found this one particularly satisfying. Part 14, Rebuilding. Claire and I went to therapy starting in January. This was her suggestion, which I received as an accurate assessment of the situation, rather than an indication of weakness in either direction. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Paulina Osei, who practiced in a building on Connecticut Avenue and had the specific quality of someone who asks questions that feel simple and turn out not to be. She asked us in the first session to each describe our understanding of the marriage we had been in before December. Claire's description was more accurate than I expected. She described a marriage that had been vivid at the beginning and had become through the accumulation of professional intensity and the specific domestic distance that follows a managed partnership. She described Owen and me as someone she had stopped seeing clearly because seeing clearly required attention she had been directing elsewhere. My description was of a marriage I had been protecting the image of while allowing the substance to atrophy. I had been invisible by professional design and present by married obligation, and I had conflated those two things in ways that served neither of us. Dr. Osei asked us what we wanted. Claire said, "I want to know who he actually is." I said, "I want to be known." Dr. Osei said, "Those sound like the same thing." We looked at each other. The work of the following months was the specific, unsexy work of two people who had been in the same house for 9 years and were beginning carefully to actually meet. Claire came home earlier on Thursdays, not because I asked her to, but because she decided to, and the decision was hers, and therefore worth more than any request of mine would have been. I started telling her about the work, the real work, the cases, the clients, the specific interesting problems that had been the primary relationship of my professional life for 13 years. She asked questions, actual questions, the systematic intelligence kind that I had been missing since the first year. We had dinner at the kitchen table more nights than not. Thomas came up for dinner on Saturdays, which became the kind of fixed point that good friendships anchor themselves to. In April, Claire made a decision that she announced to me on a Sunday morning over coffee. She had accepted Harold Sheridan's offer to lead the new due diligence practice within the firm. The practice would draw on Park Research Partners' capabilities through a formal partnership arrangement that Harold and I had spent February negotiating. Professional partnership was perhaps an unusual foundation for marital repair. We both recognized the irony. We went with it anyway. Part 15, the Honda Civic. There is a parking space at the bottom of our building that belongs to our unit. The adjacent space, the one Thomas had watched for 2 months, is now occupied when it's occupied by the same Honda Civic that has been my car for 6 years. The one that has no prestige and that valets occasionally comment on with barely contained amusement, and that has carried me to meetings with senators, depositions with counsel, and the kind of client sessions that require substantial non-disclosure agreements. I drive a Honda Civic because I like being underestimated. I have liked being underestimated for 13 years, and the professional advantages of that preference are real and have been extensively demonstrated. What I understand now in a way I did not fully understand before December is that the preference for invisibility cannot be selectively applied to professional contexts, while its costs are borne by personal ones. The person who chose to be invisible in his marriage was not making a professional calculation. He was making a fear-based one, afraid that the full version of himself offered to the person he loved would be found insufficient. This is, if I am being completely honest, the most embarrassing thing about the entire story. Not the affair, not the gala, the fact that I spent 9 years being afraid that Claire would find me insufficient if she knew what I actually was. She had, in the years I was being invisible, found me insufficient in a different way, not because of the business, but because of the absence. The managed distance, the version of myself I offered that was careful and quiet and not a full account. The insufficiency I feared was not the one she experienced. The whole thing was fear responding to fear without either of us naming it. We are naming it now. In Dr. Osei's office in the kitchen, in the specific way of two people who have arrived after considerable expense and some public drama at the beginning of the honest version of a marriage they had been running a simulation of for years. The Honda Civic is in the parking space. Thomas is on his terrace with his Chemex. Claire is in the kitchen making the specific kind of morning that we have been making together since January. The ordinary kind, the real kind, the kind that belongs to people who have decided that being visible to each other is worth whatever it costs. I am at my desk. I have work to do. Some of it is for the firm on Connecticut Avenue. Most of it is for the person in the kitchen. Both kinds matter. Both are real. That is the whole story. Begin. The end. Cast of characters: Owen Park, Managing Director, Park Research Partners. $63 million annual revenue. 22 employees, none of whom have met. Client list including 4 senators and a $40 billion private equity consortium. Drives a Honda Civic. Has been invisible by choice for 13 years and in his marriage by fear for 9. Both problems have now been addressed. Claire Park partner, Caldwell Sheridan, and more. M&A. Brilliant, systematic, had an affair she was ending when it was ended for her. Now leads the firm's due diligence practice, Thursday dinners at the kitchen table, works on meeting her husband. Marcus Reed, former managing partner, former member of the DC bar, former resident of the adjacent parking space, disbarred March. DOJ proceeding pending, has had time since December to consider what he failed to observe. Thomas Beaumont, retired District Court Judge 71, Chemex, no filter, best coffee in the building, has been watching the alley for reasons of principle and neighborliness for 4 years. Still watching, still reporting. Harold Sheridan, 81, the H in the firm name, came out of retirement for one evening in December, handled it correctly. Is pleased with the due diligence practice arrangement. Representative Diane Walsh, ranking member, House Judiciary Committee Oversight Subcommittee. Received documentation, acted on it. No further comment necessary. Dr. Paulina Osei, therapist, Connecticut Avenue. Asks questions that feel simple, turns out they aren't. Saturdays are Thomas's dinners now, so the appointments moved to Wednesdays. Part 16, the 9 years continued. I want to give you more of the 9 years because I describe them quickly and they deserve more. The first year was by any honest accounting excellent. Not excellent in the perform way that people describe early marriages when they want to be seen as having had something worth losing, actually excellent. The kind that is built from the daily accumulation of genuine interest in the person beside you. We cook together on Sunday evenings, not the performative couples cooking of people who take a class together, but the actual thing, a shared project with a functional division of labor that negotiated itself without conversation. Claire handled anything requiring precision timing. I handled anything requiring patient management. We argued about whether pasta required salted water and whether rinsing changed anything, and whether the evidence supported the widespread belief about searing meat. These arguments were the best part. We read the same books and argued about those too. She was a faster reader and would wait for me with the specific, contained impatience of someone who wants to discuss something and cannot yet. I was a more thorough reader and would send her notes from chapters she had already passed. We took 3 trips in the first 2 years, 1 domestic, 2 international, and managed each of them with the specific collaborative efficiency of 2 people who have compatible travel styles, which is rarer than it sounds, and which I recognize now as the kind of compatibility that should be named and protected. The second year, she made partner. The third year, I closed the largest single contract in Park Research Partners history to that point, a 2-year engagement with a private equity firm that tripled our revenue. I did not tell Claire. Not out of secrecy exactly, out of the specific professional compartmentalization that was at that point still a reasonable choice and had not yet become a default that was damaging us. The 4th year, we had the conversation about children. I want to be careful about this because it belongs to both of us, and I do not have the right to tell it fully. But the abbreviated version is this: we decided not to, and the decision was mutual. And in the aftermath of the decision, there was a specific quiet period, several months during which we were each processing something privately that we were not sharing with the other. And the habit of private processing that started there never fully stopped. The 5th year, the Sundays stopped. Not suddenly, gradually. The Sunday cooking became Sunday takeout when schedules were complicated, and then Sunday takeout became Wednesday leftovers, heated individually when schedules were more complicated, and at some point in the 5th year, the last true Sunday kitchen evening occurred and neither of us marked it because neither of us knew it was the last one. The 6th year, I hired the team's 14th employee and opened the Northern Virginia service office. The firm was managing $31 million in annual revenue. I drove the Honda Civic to a client briefing with 3 senators and returned home to find Claire already asleep and a note on the counter saying the Henderson merger is closing tomorrow. Sorry, don't wake me. The Henderson merger. Always the Henderson merger. Every major law firm I have since come to understand has a perpetual Henderson. Merger, the deal that is always closing, always complicated, always requiring the specific level of attention that makes the person attending to it unavailable for everything else. The 7th year, the distance settled into its permanent form. Not hostile distance, never hostile, which is sometimes what makes domestic distance most difficult to name. Just the specific parallel lives quality of 2 people who inhabit the same house and share the same logistics. and have stopped having the conversations that would distinguish their version of cohabitation from any other arrangement of convenient proximity. I missed her. I said this before. I want to say it again, with more precision. I missed the version of us that had been real and had been very good, and I did not know how to say I am missing something that is still technically here, and so I did not say it, and the missing accumulated. The 8th year, Marcus Reed's BMW appeared in the parking structure for the first time. The 9th year. Thomas noticed. Part 17, what the business was for. I built Park Research Partners for a specific reason that I have not yet told you and that I think belongs in the story. I built it because intelligence, the kind that involves understanding what people actually want rather than what they say they want, and what they are actually doing, rather than what they claim to be doing, is the most consequential professional skill I discovered I had. And because consequential skills, when they are yours, have a way of demanding to be used. I also built it because I was 28 years old and reading through a regulatory filing for a different employer and noticed in a specific footnote a discrepancy that no one else had caught that pointed toward a significant financial malpractice that was eventually confirmed and that cost several executives their positions. My employer at the time had not hired me to notice this. They had hired me to produce standard analysis. I produced the standard analysis, and additionally the footnote and the footnote changed things. After that, the kind of clients who hire people who notice footnotes started finding me. I want to tell you this because there is something I think the story might imply that I want to correct. The business was not about being secretly powerful. It was about doing work that I found consequential and doing it according to a model that required invisibility to function. The clients I work for do not want their intelligence function to be visible. The work requires the analyst to be unknown. I built a business model around a professional necessity, and then because I am human and perhaps insufficiently self-aware, allowed the professional necessity to become a personal identity that extended further than it should have. The invisible analyst was not a persona, it was a method. When it leaked into the marriage, into the 9 years of managed distance and omitted disclosure, it became something else, a protection against vulnerability rather than a professional tool. Claire had the right to know who I was, not in operational detail. Some of the work is genuinely confidential, and some of it always will be, but in scale, in character, in the full shape of the thing I had been building while she was building her own career beside me. I withheld that not for professional reasons, but for personal ones. The personal reason was this. I had watched Claire become, across the years of her career, increasingly certain that what I did was pleasant and harmless and not particularly interesting. I had watched the specific eye movement of someone reaching for the next conversation topic when my work came up. I had absorbed her friend's characterizations of me, dependable, quiet, adequate, and I had told myself this was fine, it was fine. It was my choice to be invisible. This was the trade I had made. What I had not acknowledged was that the trade was affecting her as much as me. That the person she was married to in her experience was the managed, quiet, diminished version. And that she was making decisions, including ultimately the affair in the context of that version, rather than the full one. She deserved the full version. She deserved the chance to be in a marriage with the complete person, rather than the carefully edited presentation of him. I did not give her that, and some portion of what happened in the 7th, 8th, and 9th years is on that failure. This is the part that does not appear in the gala presentation. Part 18, Harold Sheridan. Harold Sheridan called me on a Wednesday morning in February to finalize the consulting arrangement between his firm and Park Research Partners. We spoke for 40 minutes about the structure of the engagement, the confidentiality protocols, the appropriate disclosure to the firm's partnership, and the question of whether Claire's role as a partner and spouse to me created a conflict that needed to be managed. We concluded that it did, and that managing it correctly was a matter of process design rather than preclusion, and we designed the process. Near the end of the call, Harold said, "I want to ask you something that is not about the engagement." "Please," I said. "How long were you watching before December?" "The fraud specifically 6 weeks. The pattern leading to the fraud, I started noticing things about Marcus's financial behavior about 4 months before that in the course of other research. Nothing conclusive initially. But you were watching." "I'm always watching," I said. "It's professional habit." Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife died 11 years ago. We were married for 42 years. And I'll tell you something, Owen, because I think it's relevant to your situation, even if you don't ask for it." I waited. "The biggest professional mistake I made in 40 years of practice," he said, "was applying the tools of my profession to my marriage. Not in the investigative sense, I don't mean that. I mean the adversarial instinct. The habit of looking for the other party's position rather than saying what mine was. Lawyers are trained to find the move, not to say the thing. It's very effective in litigation. It's terrible in a marriage." "I understand," I said. "I'm telling you because I see the same instinct in how you operate," he said. "You found the move at the gala. It was the right move professionally and probably the necessary one personally. The question going forward is whether you can trade the instinct for something that works better in a kitchen." I thanked him. We finalized the engagement terms. After the call, I sat for a while thinking about 42 years and what it requires. Then I went to the kitchen and started on what would become, by the end of the year, a reliable Saturday morning breakfast routine. This is a small thing. It is also the kind of thing that 42 years gets built from. Part 19, December light in DC. December in Washington, D.C. has a specific quality of light that I have tried to describe to people who have not experienced it and have found it surprisingly difficult. The city sits at a latitude that means December days are short and the light is low and comes in at an angle that turns ordinary surfaces into something worth looking at. The federal buildings, which are objectively overdetermined in their grandeur, look different in December, light less certain of themselves, almost modest. On the evening of the day after the gala, I walked home from a meeting rather than taking a car. This was not the walk with Claire that had happened the night before. This was alone the specific purposeful aimlessness of someone who needs to move through a space in order to think about it. I walked through DuPont Circle. The fountain was running despite the cold, which it does in December because the city has decided it should. People walk their dogs around the circle with the specific determination of people who are meeting a commitment in weather they did not choose. I thought about visibility. I thought about the specific choice to be unseen, how it had served me professionally and how it had served me personally in the early years when being the quiet, reliable presence in a brilliant woman's life had felt like a contribution rather than a limitation, and how at some point that I cannot precisely locate, it had stopped feeling like a contribution, and it started feeling like the only available position, the managed corner where I had agreed to stand. People who build intelligence networks understand something about information asymmetry. The party that controls what is known and what is unknown controls the dynamic of any situation. I had understood this for 13 years and applied it to my professional life with sophistication. What I had not understood until Thomas's Terrace and the subsequent 6 weeks was that I had been applying the same asymmetry to my marriage, controlling what Claire knew, managing what she saw of me under the name of professionalism, but with the mechanism of fear. Fear is a reasonable professional tool. It is a bad marital one. Walking through DuPont Circle in the December light, I thought about the version of me that was going to sit at the kitchen table in an hour and begin the process of becoming visible to the person I had been invisible to for 9 years. The version that would have to offer not just the gala and the business and the net worth, but the quieter and more difficult things, the missed Sundays. The habit of omission, the specific cowardice of a person who builds information networks for a living and cannot bring himself to disclose his own. That version was less comfortable to inhabit than the invisible one. It was also the only one worth being. The fountain ran in the circle. The December light did what it does. I walked the last 8 blocks and went home. Part 20, the parking space. The parking space is mine. It is documented and paid for and has been mine for 6 years. For most of those 6 years, it held the Honda Civic 5 nights a week and was empty the other 2 when Claire and I went somewhere in her car together, which happened less frequently in the later years. For 2 months of the 9th year, another car used it on evenings when its owner believed incorrectly that no one was watching. He was wrong. Thomas was watching, and Thomas told me. And I researched, and I documented, and I chose how and when the documentation would be used. The space holds the Honda Civic again now. I am in it most mornings by 7:30, leaving for whatever the day requires. I stop at Thomas's terrace when there's time, which there usually is. I come home by 6 most evenings, which is earlier than before, and which Claire does not take for granted. Having asked me once why I started coming home earlier and received the accurate answer that I had restructured my day to make it possible. On Thursday evenings, she comes home by 7. We eat at the kitchen table. We argue about things. She is still a better arguer than I am in pure technical terms, and I am still more thorough in my preparation, and the combination continues to produce better outcomes than either of us generates alone. On Saturday mornings, Thomas comes upstairs. On Saturday evenings, we usually go somewhere, a restaurant, a concert, the kind of thing that requires leaving the house together for a purpose that is not professional. These are ordinary things. I am aware they are ordinary. I want to say this. The ordinary things are what the previous version of my life was missing. And ordinary is not a diminishment. Ordinary is in the specific sense that matters most, the whole point. I had $63 million in annual revenue in a $4.7 million fraud case that I dismantled at a gala in front of the House Judiciary Committee. What I did not have was a Thursday dinner. The Thursday dinner is better. Both can be true. Both are true. I drive a Honda Civic. I like being underestimated still professionally by design. At home, I am done with that. At home, I want to be seen. I am learning how. That is the whole story. Begin. Part 21, the file I kept. There is a folder in my system labeled Claire Marriage that I created in November during the 6 weeks between Thomas's information and the gala. The folder contains everything I found. The hotel records, the credit card patterns, the location. Data, the contact frequency analysis between Claire and Marcus. It contains the fraud documentation separately filed. It contains the timeline I constructed of the affair's development, the timeline of the fraud's development, and the timeline of Claire's attempt to end the affair beginning in September. I have not deleted this folder. I thought about deleting it, making the decision of the gala final by removing the evidence of how I arrived there. I did not delete it for the same reason. I do not delete any research file because the documentation is accurate, and accuracy is a value I do not compromise. But I have also not shown it to Claire, not because I am managing information, I am done with that, but because the file contains things that belong to her privacy and that I obtained through means she did not authorize and that I used for a specific purpose that is now complete. She knows the folder exists. I told her in February in Dr. Osei's office when we were talking about transparency and what it requires and where the boundaries of it live. I told her what was in it. She asked whether she could see it. I told her it was her decision and that either choice was reasonable. She said she did not want to see it. Then she said, "Is there anything in it that's different from what you've told me?" "No," I said. She nodded. "Then I don't need it. You told me the truth. The documentation of how you arrived at the truth is not the truth itself." This was, I thought, one of the more precise things either of us had said in the course of the year. It was also, I recognized the specific intelligence she had brought to her legal work applied to a personal situation, and the application was correct. The folder remains in the system. It is accurate. It is complete. It represents a period of the marriage that was real and is now past. The period now is different. The folder for the current period is still being assembled, and its contents are considerably more ordinary and considerably more worth keeping. Part 22, what happened to the Johnson case. I mentioned it at the beginning almost in passing that Park Research Partners works for clients, including 4 U.S. senators. One of those senators, I will not name them for reasons that are both professional and ongoing, had in the months before the gala engaged my firm in a research project that intersected with the fraud documentation I had developed on Marcus Reed. The intersection was this: the fraud mechanism Marcus had used, the transaction structure that moved money through compliant-looking instruments to offshore entities, was my analysis showed not original to him. It was a template. And the template had been used by at least 2 other parties in the preceding 5 years that I could document with available evidence and probably several more that I could not. I provided the senator with the full analysis in January after the gala, after the formal fraud case was in progress, and I could provide the analysis without compromising the ongoing proceeding. The senator's response was to ask whether I would be willing to provide the same analysis to the subcommittee that was already looking at the law firm case, Representative Walsh's subcommittee. I was willing. I testified, if testimony is the right word, for a private briefing conducted under appropriate confidentiality arrangements in February. The briefing took 4 hours. The documentation I provided added 6 additional entities to the subcommittee's inquiry and will, I am told, form part of the evidentiary foundation for legislation that the subcommittee is expected to produce in the coming session. I am telling you this, not because it changes the personal story, it doesn't, but because I want to be accurate about who I am and what I do. The personal story, the marriage and the gala and the rebuilding is a true story, but it is not the entirety of my life, and the business that made the gala possible is not something I conduct for the dramatic effect of it. It is work, serious work that I find consequential. The Honda Civic that carries me to those briefings is the same one that carries me to Thomas's Terrace and to Thursday dinner and to the farmer's market on Connecticut Avenue that Claire and I started going to in the spring because she read that it was good, and it was, and we now have opinions about which vendors we prefer, which is the specific ordinary evidence of a life being lived together. Both things are true. The work and the farmer's market. The $63 million and the argument about whether the Thursday pasta should be from the box or from scratch, it should be from scratch. She is coming around to this. Both things are real. Both are mine. Part 23, Thomas at 80. Thomas will turn 80 in the spring. I know this because he mentioned it last November pre-gala in the specific casual way that people mention significant upcoming events when they want the mention to register without making a thing of it. He said, I'll be 80 in April. I said, we'll have a dinner. He said, you don't have to do that. I said, I know. We are planning the dinner now. Claire is organizing it, not in the Susan way, not the color-coded calendar, efficient management of logistics, but in the way of someone who has decided that Thomas is worth organizing something for, because Thomas was the person who looked out from a terrace and told the truth and contributed to a chain of events that has resulted in Thursday dinners and Saturday mornings and a marriage that is being honestly examined for the first time. 30 people, we think. Thomas's nephew Marcus the other, Marcus the one who helped at the gala, 2 of his former clerks who have stayed in touch, some neighbors from the building, and a number of people whose names I do not yet know, but whose attendance Thomas has described as likely. I am making the food. Not professional catering, I am making the food. This is a decision I made in January when Claire and I restarted the Sunday evenings, and I have been, since then, expanding the range of what I can reliably produce in a kitchen with the specific systematic approach that I bring to everything. Thomas approved this plan. He said, I've been eating my own cooking for 70 years. Other people's food is a gift. Ma'am. He also said separately on a Tuesday morning with the Chemex, you know what I like about this building now? I said, tell me. It's noisier, he said, in the good way. I looked at him. Voices, he said, from upstairs, arguing about pasta and laughing at something and the sound of a kitchen being used in the evening. I can hear it with the windows open. It used to be very quiet. He handed me a coffee and went back to the post. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and worked on a client matter that required the specific focused attention of someone who notices footnotes and understands what they mean. The work was good, and I was good at it. That evening, I went to the kitchen and started on dinner. Claire came home at 6:50. She came to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame and looked at what I was doing. That smells good, she said. Pasta from scratch, I said. I've been working on the technique. She sat down at the kitchen table. Tell me what you're doing. I told her. The specific choices, the flour ratio, the resting time, the sauce construction. She listened with the full attention of someone who is genuinely interested, the attention from the hotel lobby in Chicago. The attention I had been missing for 4 years, and that I had decided in November to try to earn back. I didn't know you could cook, she said. I've been learning, I said. Since when? Since January, I said, when I decided it was worth learning things for. She looked at me across the kitchen table. You're the most interesting person I've been not paying attention to for several years, she said. I know, I said. I'm paying attention now, she said. I know that too, I said. The pasta was done. We ate it at the kitchen table. Thomas was probably on his terrace reading the evening edition of something, occasionally glancing at the building, with the specific attentive care of someone who has decided that observation is a form of love. The light in DC in the evening does the thing it does. The parking space holds the Honda Civic. The folder in the system holds what it holds. We are here. We are both paying attention. That is, as it turns out, enough. That is, as it turns out, everything. Begin. A final note on being underestimated. I want to say one more thing, because I think the story risks being read in a way that is not entirely accurate. The gala was satisfying, I will not pretend otherwise. The specific theatrical quality of standing at the head of a table at the Hay Adams and delivering information that reorganized everyone's understanding of everyone else in the room, including Marcus Reed's understanding of me, had the quality of a thing well executed. I had planned it carefully. It went as planned. That is a professional satisfaction, and I acknowledge it. But I want to be clear about what it was not. It was not the point. The point was never to show Marcus Reed what he had failed to see. The point was to address a fraud that was real and a threat that was real in the setting and the format that would produce the correct result protective of the innocent parties, consequential for the guilty one, and visible to the witnesses whose involvement would make the consequence stick. The invisibility I have maintained for 13 years is a professional strategy. It is effective. I have no intention of changing it. What I have changed, what December changed, is the application of that strategy inside my own front door. The invisible analyst, the quiet man in the corner, the person nobody retains the name of, these are all real. They are professional tools and they are mine. Owen Park, who is married to Claire, who is learning to make pasta from scratch, who goes to the farmer's market on Connecticut Avenue and has opinions about which vendors are worth the wait, who eats dinner at a kitchen table on Thursdays, and argues about things in the specific way of two people, who find each other's arguments worth having. This is also real. It is also mine. The two versions have always been the same person. The work of the past year has been making sure that the person in the kitchen knows he does not have to choose between them. He does not. I do not. The Honda Civic is in the parking space. Thomas is on his terrace. Claire is in the kitchen. I am for the first time in a long time exactly where I want to be. Not invisible. Here. Washington, D.C. December light. The fountain in DuPont Circle, the Chemex on Thomas's terrace, the kitchen table on Thursdays, the parking space with the Honda Civic, $63 million in annual revenue and pasta from scratch, and a marriage being rebuilt from accurate materials. The quiet man in the corner was never quiet because he had nothing to say. He was quiet because he had not yet decided who deserved to hear it. He has decided now. The decision is her. The decision is this. The decision is here. Begin. The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody is watching. For 13 years, nobody watched Owen Park. For 9 years, his wife watched a version of him that he had chosen to offer rather than the complete one. Both things are now corrected. The folders are updated. The parking space is his. The kitchen is warm. Thomas's terrace has the best view in the building and always will. The story is not over. It is in the part where the ordinary days are being built one at a time from honest materials by two people who have decided that accurate is better than convenient and present is better than managed. That is all. That is enough. Begin.